Hello everyone! So we're going to start out the textbook with chapter 1 as usual. This is defining culture and its parts, and this is very much an overview chapter. Many of the terms that you see in this chapter will be repeated multiple times throughout the textbook, so understanding them and being able to identify the differences between them early on is going to be vital for you as you progress forward. I'm going to go through the chapter and talk about the different subjects that chapter 1 covers, so you can easily follow along with your textbook, but I've also provided this PowerPoint for your use as we continue through. So you can use this as part of your study guide, as part of your additions to discussions, so you can refer back to this for the discussion boards, and as well as, for the quizzes or any assignments in the course. So please feel free to use these PowerPoints as much or as little as you'd like. But first off, defining culture and its parts, we're going to define intercultural communication, since this is the basis of the entire class, as well as what culture is and how culture and communication are definitely related. Then we'll talk about different worldviews, cultural patterns, cultural value orientations, so the terms high context and low context will pop up, as well as cultural values such as masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, and individualism versus collectivism. Next, we'll talk about culture skills, so adopting different attitudes, acquiring knowledge, developing culture-specific skills, and then just a brief review of key terms and summaries are offered at the end of the textbook. Starting off, obviously I want to define communication with you guys, since this is most likely one of the first, if not the only, communication course that you've taken or will take in college. So understanding how complex communication can be is going to be helpful for this course. So usually we see communication as a transaction-based model, because you as a person are both a sender and a receiver of messages simultaneously. So you are constantly sending out verbal and nonverbal messages to your audience, to whoever you are speaking to, and receiving kind of their feedback or whatever they communicate to you as well, verbally and nonverbally. So think of this as a big cycle. All parties have some influence over each other. The world becomes more meaningful through communication with other individuals. I just made myself sound like my job is super duper important, and to me it really is, but at a personal level for you all, outside of studying communication, just existing and working through relationships in your life and establishing what you want, what you desire, what your career goals are, communication is at the core of this. And unfortunately, it's not a simple thing. Communicating effectively is pretty complex, and culture has a big impact on that. Different cultures have different communication patterns and different expectations for communication. Of course, we couldn't make this easy on ourselves. Communication, many things can be universal because they are symbolic, but language is not universal. There are many different languages, and nonverbal meanings of gestures or posture or stance or eye contact is not universal. So giving direct eye contact in American culture is seen as respectful and as being truthful, whereas giving direct eye contact in a lot of Eastern cultures is seen as being very disrespectful. Next, we're going to define culture. Culture is really at the core of intercultural communication, obviously, but it's also at the core of who you are. Your culture is very unique, and even though you share cultural traits and cultural groups, you are just like your fingerprints. You're pretty unique. You are an individual. So your cultures are going to differ. Even if you are considered a Christian, you're not going to be exactly the same as other Christians. If you are Muslim, you may not be the same as other Muslims. If you're Japanese, that doesn't mean every person that's Japanese is the same, if you see what I'm saying. So culture, according to Nietzsche, means the ever-changing values, traditions, social and political relationships, and worldview created and shared by a group of people who are bound together by a combination of factors which can include a common history, geographic location, language, social class, and or religion. This is on page 2 of your textbook. Culture is the shared beliefs, values, and practices of a group of people. So that's why I'm saying you'll share cultural traits with others, but your beliefs, values, and practices may not completely mirror someone else within the same cultural group just based on upbringing. So this includes language or languages, other symbols, norms, and rules, and how behavior is appropriately displayed and understood. So, like I said before, nonverbal communication using certain gestures may mean one thing in this country or this culture and something completely different in another culture. People are familiar with their own languages, gestures, their facial expressions, their conversational customs, the give and take of conversation, and the norms that they experience. So when communicating with people whose attitudes, values, beliefs, customs, and behaviors are different, there can be a lot of misunderstandings in meaning and attributions. Culture and communication are definitely linked, and it's a complex relationship. If this was a Facebook relationship between culture and communication, they would click on the "It's Complicated" link for that. Culture influences communication and vice versa. So culture influences the process by which we perceive reality, how our reality is created and maintained. Intercultural communication is the communication that occurs when two or more people from different cultures interact. Of course, there's no way to understand all cultures and co-cultures. That would take your entire life, and you still wouldn't even scratch the surface. There are so many different cultural and co-cultural approaches to communication. However, there are certain characteristics that occur repeatedly, and the study of intercultural communication kind of rests on those characteristics and understanding them. So many of you may be taking this course as a requirement for your degree because the expectation is that you will work in an intercultural environment, or you will be associated with many different individuals that might communicate differently. Worldview. There are as many definitions of worldview as there are definitions of the words communication and culture. They're very, very abstract terms. Worldview of a person or people is the way they interpret reality and events. Worldview is a culture's orientation towards God in that culture, or lack thereof, humanities, nature, questions of existence, the universe, the meaning of life, cosmos, life, morality, ethical reasoning, death, any philosophical issues. So worldview is pretty deep stuff. The connection to culture becomes very obvious if you recall that culture is automatic and unconscious. So there are multiple worldviews. The expressions of a worldview. What is the purpose of life? Is the world ruled by law, chance, or God? What is the right way to live? How did the world begin? What happens when we die? Those are all very broad topics that deal with worldview. And every one of you may answer those questions differently or not have an answer that you want to choose. The importance of having a worldview is identified by Pennington. This is on page 4. If one understands a culture's worldview and cosmology, reasonable accuracy can be attained in predicting behaviors and motivations in other dimensions. So for our purpose, predicting behavior is kind of shorthand for understanding how other people perceive the world and communicate. Another link between the worldview and behavior is seen in how a culture perceives the business arena. So the foundation of a nation's culture and the most important determinant of social and business conduct are the religious and philosophical beliefs of a people. From these beliefs spring role perceptions, behavior patterns, code of ethics, and the institutionalized manner in which economic activities are performed. So linking worldview to how you do business, how the economy works. Religion as a worldview. This is in every culture you will come across and has been for years and years. We may think of worldview and religion immediately. There's a high association between the two. All societies have spiritual beliefs and practices, which is usually referred to as religion, but it may not necessarily be organized. Secularism as a worldview. Like traditional religion, secularism has experienced times of great interest as well as periods of decline. Recently in the United States, 2 events have again brought the topic of secularism to the forefront, and these have been in current debate of the notion of evolution and teaching versus creationism and teaching. And that's become quite the public controversy through media and through the political arena. The core premise here is based on the belief that there is a social order and deep structured belief system that can exist without God or without organized religion. Not only do secularists deny the existence of God, but they also take evolution as a fact, since usually they hold a strong belief in the centrality of science and scientific method. An interesting ideology dealing with secularism and religion is that unique link between those individuals who believe in evolution and scientific method and trust that, but as well as have some religious background, believing in a higher power and the notion that not all can be explained. You'll come across many of these individuals that are very religious or very secular, or find this interesting balance between the two. Spirituality as a worldview. This is a concept that's related to religion, and many individuals will associate the terms as being the same, but they're not necessarily the same. Spirituality relates to American values of individualism. At the core of this worldview is the belief that each person can use his or her individual resources to discover inner peace. And whether that is a connection to the self, to the earth, to some higher power, it really depends on the person. Cultural patterns. Features such as race, religion, age, generation, politics, gender, sexual orientation, economic status, education, occupation, and many other factors affect communication for better or for worse. And I'm sure all of you have seen this happen at some point in your life, that one of those features has been the cause of positive or negative communication. These are considered co-cultures that carry different meanings, not only in terms of language, but how people present themselves to others and interpret other individuals' behaviors. Communication and culture include shared beliefs, values, and norms. Remember those three terms. They're going to pop up again and again. Beliefs, values, norms. Cultural patterns provide a basic set of standards that guide people's thoughts and actions and are not so much consciously taught as unconsciously experienced. See on page 8 the dimensions of culture associated with characteristics, and it links the different notion, the worldview versus the orientations. The next few pages consist of many tables to kind of give you more examples and more of a visual representation of what the chapter is talking about in defining culture. So on page 10 and 11, there's a comparison of the values of Americans, Japanese, and Arabs, as well as cultural patterns and orientations, American value system, and how Americans see Arab culture through orientation and beliefs and behaviors. Alright, so I'm going to focus on pages 14 and 15 a bit. 14 talks about the comparison of low and high context cultures, as well as the differences between collectivist and individualist cultures. And it is important to know these differences. So, characteristics of a low context culture. Communication is explicit. Individualism is valued. Interpersonal bonds are very fragile. Linear logic is emphasized. Direct verbal interaction is valued, and one is less able to read nonverbal expressions, so much more direct. More logic is used to present ideas. Very highly structured messages. Self-expression is valued, opinions and desires are stated very directly, and the individual tries to persuade others to his or her viewpoint. Clear, eloquent speech and verbal fluency is praiseworthy and admired, and time is highly organized and structured. A high context culture. Communication is covert and implicit. Groups are valued over the individual. Interpersonal bonds are very strong. There's a spiral logic. An indirect verbal interaction is valued, and one is able to read nonverbal expressions a bit more easily than those from low context cultures. More feeling is used in expression. Simple, ambiguous messages are used. Harmony is valued, so language is ambiguous and silence is often used to avoid confrontation. Saying no directly is avoided. This could also be seen as passive aggressiveness. Ambiguity and use of silence is admired. Communicators talk around the point, allowing each other to fill in missing pieces. It's much more of an exchange. Time is open and flexible, more responsive to people's needs. Differences between collectivist and individualistic cultures. Differences between collectivist and individualistic cultures. From collectivist culture, identity is based on the social network. Children think in terms of we. Harmony should always be maintained, and direct communication is usually avoided. At work, the relationship prevails over the task. Ideologies of equality prevail over ideologies of individual freedom, and harmony and consensus in society are the ultimate goals. So if you couldn't tell, the focus is on the group and less on the individual person. Individualistic cultures. Identity is based on the person. Children think in terms of I instead of we. Speaking one's mind is very important, so open communication. Task prevails over the relationship. Ideologies of individual freedom prevail over ideologies of equality, so personal gain tends to be a little bit more focused here. And then self-actualization of every individual is the ultimate goal. So in other words, reaching your personal highest potential is at the core of how your culture is structured. The differences between small and large power distance cultures. In a small power distance culture, inequalities among people are minimized, subordinates expect to be consulted, privileges and status symbols are frowned upon, power is based on formal position, and the use of power should be legitimate and is subject to criteria of what is good and what is evil. If there's a large power distance, inequalities among people are both expected and desired. Subordinates expect to be told what to do. Privileges and status symbols for managers are expected and popular. Power is based on family or friends, charisma, and the ability to use force. Might prevails over right. Whoever holds the power is right and considered good. Differences between weak and strong uncertainty avoidance cultures. So a few examples. Weak uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty is a normal feature of life. Every day is accepted as it comes, and stress is very low. Tolerance and moderation are practiced here. In strong uncertainty avoidance, uncertainty in life is felt as a continuous threat that must be fought. High stress levels, and there are many numerous precise laws and rules to help minimize uncertainty. And then the differences between feminine and masculine cultures. Please do not confuse this with sex. This is not male-female. This is feminine versus masculine culture. So even if you are a man, you may be considered part of a feminine culture. Same if you are a woman, you may be part of a masculine culture. So take gender, take sex out of the context here. Feminine culture. Dominant values are caring for other people and preservation. People and warm relationships are very important. Everyone should be modest. Men and women are allowed to be tender and concerned with relationships, so emotions are okay. Both fathers and mothers deal with facts and feelings. Equality, solidarity, and quality of work life are stressed. And preservation of the environment is a high priority. Part of a masculine culture, dominant values are material success and progress. Money and things are considered important, so materialistic. Males are to be assertive, ambitious, tough. Women are to be tender and take care of relationships. So more traditional gender roles. Fathers deal with facts, mothers deal with feelings. Equity, competition amongst colleagues, and performance are stressed, and maintenance of economic growth is high priority. Something you may notice in your own life, that you may be raised with one of these cultures and start to experience your own adult life in a different culture. You may also see that you were raised in a culture that you've also continued. It really just depends on where you grew up, when you grew up, and who was raising you. So the rest of the chapter breaks down the different tables that we reviewed. The high and low context culture, the cultural values, so masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, individualism, collectivism. And then 24 and 25 talk about describing and adapting to cultural differences, so finishing up that table, tips for communicating across different cultures, and then cultural skills. So I'll talk a little bit about cultural skills. Adopt correct attitudes. The right attitude for intercultural communication involves your motivations and flexibility. Flexibility is key here. You must be willing to try and have a desire to succeed when communicating across different cultures. Willing to try new behaviors rather than expecting other people to adjust to what our style of communication is. Acquire knowledge about other cultures. Of course, like I said before, there's no way to know everything about everything. However, if you are part of a relationship or a friendship with someone who is from a very different culture than you, it helps to brush up and to know a bit more about that culture or to ask about that culture. It's amazing what you'll learn with just a question. Develop culture-specific skills. So you might need to adapt your communication skills in different environments. So practice listening. You should do this in all facets of your life. It helps every relationship, not just those that are intercultural. Practice intercultural empathy. So placing yourself in the other person's cultural world to try to experience what they are experiencing. So there's that quote, don't judge another person until you've walked 2 moons in his moccasins or walked 2 miles in his shoes. Develop flexibility. There's that term again. So part of an appropriate attitude towards intercultural encounters, but it also helps you in your stress levels. Adapt ownership of responsibility. So assigning and expressing appropriate responsibility for interactional events to each participant. So what that means. Culture is very powerful in the context of communication. So be mindful when you speak. Be mindful when you listen. People are not born knowing what to say and who to say it to. We learn a lot through trial and error. We learn through modeling from people that show us their behaviors and we try to mimic those behaviors. People change. Our interpersonal roles may change. Communication skills change with that. Your communication competence will constantly be changing and hopefully improving as you continue through your life. So as a child, you may have learned communication patterns that you don't use now. Or if you did learn certain communication patterns, you may have adopted them and kept them and just honed in on your skills with them and become better and better at it. Some people are pretty good public speakers on their own with little to no formal involvement in training, but they'll just get better with time and with practice. Other individuals do not have such a seemingly natural talent towards public speaking, so they may shy away from it, they may straight up hate it, or they might just seek out extra help in becoming more proficient in public speaking. That's just an example. The end of the chapter offers key terms that you can find throughout the chapter. I recommend referring to these key terms through each chapter when you're studying for quizzes or for the exams. So a lot of the questions on the exams in the course are based on key terms, so understanding what they are and examples of them. So I would say go through and make a note of this or bookmark that page. And then offers a summary of the chapter, which is also a really nice thing to refer back to, especially when you are completing assignments in the course. So that is chapter 1, defining culture and its parts. It is a very technical chapter, a lot of different terminology to learn, and if it seems a little bit overwhelming right now, please don't worry. You're going to see many of these terms again and again, so over time and repetition you will definitely get used to them.